The rain wasn't just falling. It was attacking. Each drop hit the windows of my small bungalow like a tiny fist, demanding to be let in. The wind howled through the Douglas firs in my backyard. A mournful, angry sound that seemed to seep through the walls. Inside, I was perfectly dry, perfectly safe. But my sanctuary felt like it was under siege. I stood in my living room, the lights off, watching the scene unfold through the streaks of water that blurred the world outside. My mother, Sharon, was the centerpiece of the drama. She stood on my small porch, drenched and shivering, her silver hair plastered to her skull. She wasn't wearing a coat. That was a deliberate choice. I knew. She had perfected the art of looking pitiful. Her face a masterpiece of misery aimed directly at my heart. Beside her, my brother Leo vibrated with a righteous fury. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was just pounding a fist against my front door. A steady, rhythmic thud that matched the frantic beat in my chest. Thud. 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 Let us in. Let family in. How could you do this? Each impact was an accusation. I wrapped my arms around myself, my fingers digging into my ribs. This was the moment I had been dreading. The one I had been preparing for without even knowing it. This was the consequence. The culmination of a lifetime of choices, hers and mine. Why was my mother standing in a storm, trying to get into the home I wouldn't let her enter? The answer was simple. And it was complicated. But to understand the flood, you have to go back to the first drop of rain. 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks earlier. There was no storm. There was only quiet. My quiet. The kind of quiet I had worked for, saved for, and bled for. My house, nestled in a sleepy Beaverton neighborhood just outside of Portland, was my greatest achievement. It wasn't big. Just 2 small bedrooms. A living room that flowed into a kitchen. And a bathroom. But every square inch of it was mine. The scent of lavender from the garden I'd planted and the rich, earthy smell of damp soil was the first thing that greeted me in the morning. The warm glow from the lamp on my reading chair was the last thing I saw at night. It was my fortress of solitude. The place where I, Maya, could finally just be. My life was built around that peace. I worked as a freelance graphic designer. My clients scattered across the country. My office was a small desk in the corner of my living room, looking out onto the green, mossy chaos of my backyard. Most days were a calm rhythm of client emails, the soft click of my laptop keys, and the low hum of the coffee pot. On the wall above my desk, I had framed the original savings chart I made when I first decided I would buy a house. It was a mess of colored markers, crossed out goals, and revised timelines. It was ugly, but it was my trophy. It represented 5 years of saying no. No to expensive vacations. No to new cars. No to trendy restaurants. No to the easy comfort of debt. That afternoon, I was finishing a logo for a new coffee brand when my laptop screen lit up with an incoming video call. The name glowed in a familiar blue bubble, Mom. I sighed, saving my work before clicking accept. Her face filled the screen, slightly pixelated and far too close to the camera. She was beaming, her skin sun-kissed and her smile so wide it crinkled the corners of her eyes. Behind her, An aggressively blue sky met an even bluer ocean. The faint sound of a mariachi band drifted through her microphone. Maya. Honey. Can you see me? Her voice was a little too loud. Laced with the cheerful energy of someone on vacation. Loud and clear. Mom. Looks like you're having fun. Fun doesn't even begin to describe it. She said. Turning the phone around. I got a dizzying view of a pristine white sand beach. An infinity pool. And then. My brother Leo. Raising a margarita in a toast to his new wife. Brianna. They were both glowing. Beautiful. And looked like they belonged on the cover of a magazine. The wedding was just perfect. Absolutely perfect. You should have seen it. Honey. Brianna's dress. My goodness. It cost a fortune. But you know what? It was worth every single penny. I forced a smile. I saw the pictures you sent. It looked amazing. I had opted out of the destination wedding in Cancun. The cost of the flight. The hotel. The time-off war kit was more than I could justify. I had sent a generous gift and my sincere apologies. Leo had been cool about it. But I knew Mom was disappointed. Pictures don't do it justice. She continued. Turning the camera back to her face. It's just. You know. Leo deserves the best. And Brianna is such a sweet girl. Her family is lovely. We just wanted to give them the perfect start. I'm really happy for them. Mom. And I was. Mostly. I know you are. Sweetie. You're such a good sister. She paused. Taking a sip of something from a coconut. You work too hard. You know that? Sitting in your little house all day. You should get out more. It wasn't meant to be a criticism. Not really. It was just how she saw my life. Small. Quiet. Lacking the grand. Expensive gestures she valued so much. I didn't bother explaining that my little house was the reason I could sleep at night. We chatted for a few more minutes about the weather in Portland. Her flight home. The usual things. Then. Just as I thought the call was winding down. She said it. Casually. As if she were mentioning she'd bought a new brand of coffee. Oh. Speaking of which. I have some news. To help with the wedding costs and give the kids a really nice nest egg. I sold the house on Southeast. The warmth in my chest turned to ice. My fingers went numb. I stared at her smiling face on my screen. The cheerful blue sky behind her feeling like a cruel joke. What? The word came out as a whisper. I sold the house. She repeated. A little louder. You know, I've been talking about downsizing for ages. It was just too much space for me. Rattling around in there all by myself. And honestly. Maya. What is a house for if not for family? It was the right thing to do. Family comes first. Family comes first. The phrase echoed in my head. A hollow. Bitter mantra. My mug of tea felt heavy in my hand. The world tilted slightly. The house she sold wasn't just a house. It was my childhood home. The place where I grew up. Where every wall held a memory. But more than that. It was her only real asset. Her security. Her future. And she had liquidated it for a one-week party in Mexico. For Leo. My mind flashed back. An involuntary, painful jolt. I was 19 again. Sitting in my cramped dorm room at Portland Community College. The smell of instant noodles and desperation hung in the air. I was working 2 part-time jobs. But I was still short on tuition for the next semester. I had swallowed my pride and called home. I could still hear her voice. Full of strained sympathy. "Oh, sweetie. I wish I could help. I really do. But things are tight right now. We need to save for Leo's tuition at the university. You know how important that is. He's got so much potential." I was the practical one. The responsible one. The one who went to community college to save money. He was the golden child. The one for whom no expense was too great. No dream too big. I hadn't argued. I just hung up. Went online. And applied for a 3rd job waiting tables on weekends. It was a cold, hard lesson in family economics. I wasn't a bad investment. I just wasn't the preferred one. I was the independent one. And in that moment, I realized I was the independent one because I had to be. There was no backup plan for me. I was my own backup plan. Now, 10 years later, that same woman was telling me she had sold her entire future for an $80,000 wedding. My throat felt tight. I tried to form a question: where will you live? What's your plan? But no words came out. She didn't seem to notice my silence. She was lost in her own narrative of maternal sacrifice. Anyway, my flight lands on Tuesday. I can't wait to see you and tell you all about it. Love you. The screen went dark before I could respond. I was left staring at my own reflection in the blank laptop screen. A pale, shocked face. The quiet of my house suddenly felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was fragile. And I had a terrible, sinking feeling that the biggest expense of my brother's wedding hadn't been paid for yet. I just didn't realize the storm was heading directly for my front door. The silence in my house was deafening. The cheerful mariachi music from Mom's video call seemed to linger in the air like a ghost, mocking the cold dread that had settled in my stomach. I pushed back from my desk. My half-finished logo design looking absurd and trivial. Who cared about fonts and color palettes when a Category 5 hurricane named Sharon was about to make landfall? I spent the next few days in a haze of anxiety. I tried to work. But my mind kept replaying her words. I sold the house. Family comes first. Every time I looked around my own home at the bookshelves I had built with my own hands. At the mismatched thrift store mugs in my kitchen. At the soft quilt on my bed, a wave of possessiveness washed over me. This was mine. I had earned this quiet. I had built these walls to keep the chaos out. Not to invite it in. I considered calling her back. Demanding an explanation. But what was the point? The deed was done. Calling would only give her a platform to perform her favorite role, the selfless, misunderstood martyr. I knew how the script went. She would sigh and say, "I did it for my children." And I would be cast as the ungrateful, materialistic daughter who didn't understand the purity of a mother's love. So I waited. I cleaned my house obsessively. As if scrubbing the floors could somehow scrub the impending doom from my mind. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. A day after she was supposed to have landed. It wasn't my mom. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Followed by a photo. The text read, "Hey Maya. It's Brianna. We're grabbing coffee with your mom. Thought you might want to join. We're at the Dragonfly on Alberta. The photo was a selfie of Brianna and my mom. Heads tilted together. Both smiling sweetly. It was a calculated move. A casual invitation wrapped in a velvet glove. They were presenting a united front. I knew this wasn't a social call. It was an ambush. My first instinct was to say no. To claim I was swamped with work. But I knew that would only postpone the inevitable and make me look unreasonable. She's just trying to see you. My conscience whispered. It's just coffee. So I typed back. Be there in 30. I changed out of my sweatpants and into a pair of jeans and a plain gray sweater. Armor for the battle to come. The Dragonfly was one of those aggressively trendy Portland cafes with reclaimed wood tables and artisanal everything. Brianna had chosen the location well. It was public. Bright. And filled with people. It was harder to cause a scene in a place where everyone was pretending to write their screenplay. I spotted them at a small table by the window. Mom was sitting with her back to the room. But I could see Brianna's perfectly highlighted hair. She saw me approach and her face lit up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Maya. You made it. She chirped. Standing up to give me an awkward, one-armed hug. She smelled like expensive perfume and vanilla lattes. Hi. Brianna. Mom. I sat down. The chair scraping slightly against the concrete floor. My mom turned to me. Her expression a careful blend of happiness and weary sadness. Hi. Sweetie. It's so good to see you. She looked tired. The post-vacation glow already fading. You too. How was the flight? I asked. My voice stiff. Oh. You know. Long. She waved a dismissive hand. But it's nice to be back. Brianna took charge. The perfect hostess of this little intervention. Can I get you something? Their oat milk latte is divine. Just water is fine. Thanks. I said. An uncomfortable silence fell as Brianna went to the counter. I looked at my mom. Really looked at her. For the first time since the call. She seemed smaller somehow. Diminished without the backdrop of her home. Her house had always been an extension of her over-decorated. A little cluttered. But solid. Permanent. Now she just seemed. Adrift. A pang of sympathy. Sharp and unwelcome. Pierced through my armor of resentment. So. I began. Deciding to face the storm head-on. Selling the house. That was a big move. She flinched. Her smile tightening. It was time for a change. Maya. I told you. Where are you staying now? Oh. Well. For now. I'm at Leo and Brianna's. She said. Gesturing vaguely. But it's. You know. They're newlyweds. They need their space. And their apartment is tiny. I'm practically sleeping on a pile of wedding gifts. She laughed. A brittle sound with no humor in it. Brianna returned with my water and her own elaborate coffee. Placing them on the table with delicate care. We love having her. Of course. She chimed in. Sliding back into her seat. It's just. We want her to be comfortable. We've been so worried about her. She reached across the table and patted my mother's hand. The gesture was so theatrical it was almost comical. And then, the curtain rose on the main event. "Maya. Honey." My mom began, her voice dropping to a soft, pleading tone. "We need to talk about my living situation. It's a bit of a mess right now." I nodded slowly, my heart starting to pound again. "Okay. Well, I've been thinking," she said, her eyes welling up with practiced tears. "And I was hoping maybe I could stay with you for a little while. Just for a few months. Just until I get back on my feet and figure things out." There it was. The request I knew was coming. Delivered with the emotional weight of a lifetime of guilt. She made it sound so reasonable. So temporary. Just a few months. But I knew my mother. A few months would turn into a year. And a year would turn into a permanent fixture in my life. My sanctuary would become her territory. My quiet would be filled with her unsolicited advice. Her constant television shows. Her need for attention. My home would stop being mine. Brianna jumped in before I could even process the words. "It just makes so much sense. Maya. You have that extra bedroom you're not even using. And you're home all day. So you could keep her company. We would feel so much better knowing she was with you." They had it all worked out. My life. My home. My space all neatly repurposed to solve a problem they had created. They saw my empty bedroom not as my future office or a guest room for friends, but as a vacant resource they were entitled to. The sympathy I had felt just moments before evaporated. Replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I thought of all the years I had spent carefully constructing my life. Brick by painful brick. The lonely nights eating ramen so I could save an extra $20. The weekends I spent working instead of going out with friends. The sheer terror of signing that mortgage. Committing myself to 30 years of debt. All for the promise of a place that was truly my own. They were asking me to hand it over. Not with a gun, but with a teary-eyed plea and a vanilla latte. I took a slow sip of my water. The glass was cool against my lips. I looked from my mother's pleading, expectant face to Brianna's sweet, manipulative smile. The noise of the cafe faded away. There was only this table. This moment. This decision. I could say yes and become the dutiful daughter. The good sister. I could swallow my resentment and sacrifice my peace for the sake of family. Or I could protect the life I had built. I put the glass down on the table. The sound a quiet, definitive click in the silent space between us. I looked my mother directly in the eye. "No," I said. The word was small, but it felt immense. It felt like a locked door. "I'm sorry, Mom. But no. That's not going to work for me." The shock on their faces was instantaneous. It was as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Brianna's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. My mother's carefully constructed tears froze on her lashes. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, as if she couldn't comprehend what she had just heard. It was a word she had said to me many times, but one she had never expected to hear in return. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. It was the sound of a foundation cracking. The carefully managed family dynamic. The unspoken rules of sacrifice and entitlement had just been shattered by a single word. And in that moment, I knew there was no going back. The storm had finally made landfall. For a long moment. The only sound was the clatter of ceramic and the hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. My single word. No. Hung in the air between us. A solid, immovable object. It was a word of refusal. A word of rebellion. A word that had reset the entire landscape of our family. My mother's face crumpled. It wasn't a slow, graceful slide into sadness. It was an immediate and total collapse. Like a building being demolished. Her lower lip began to tremble. And her eyes, which moments before had been full of hopeful expectation, now flooded with a profound, wounded shock. No. She whispered. Her voice cracking. What? What do you mean? No. Brianna, the ever-attentive actress, gasped softly and reached for my mother's hand. Sharon. It's okay. She murmured, while shooting me a look that was pure, venomous judgment. She doesn't mean it. Oh. I think she does. My mother said. Her voice gaining a sharp, quavering edge. She pulled her hand away from Brianna's and fixed her watery gaze on me. You're really saying no? To your own mother? After everything I have done for you? Here it comes. I thought. The guilt ledger. The accounting of every act of maternal care. Now presented as a debt I was refusing to pay. Mom. This has nothing to do with what you've done for me. I said. Trying to keep my voice even. Steady. My house is not big enough. I need my own space to live and work. It's just not an option. Not an option. She let out a laugh that was half a sob. It was a sound designed to attract attention. And the couple at the next table glanced over with mild curiosity. Your space. Maya. When you were 21 and your heart was broken by that boy. What was his name? Mark. When you called me at 2 in the morning. Hysterical. Who got in her car and drove 3 hours to your tiny apartment? Who held you while you cried for a week straight and ate all my ice cream? Did I say? Sorry. Honey. I need my space. Did I tell you my home wasn't an option? My cheeks burned. She was taking one of the most vulnerable moments of my life and twisting it into a weapon. That's different. And you know it. How is it different? She demanded. Her voice rising. It's about family being there for each other. I sold my Hamami Homido give your brother a beautiful start to his new life. That was a sacrifice. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. All I am asking for is a little help in return. A temporary place to land. And my own daughter. In her big empty house. Is telling me no. It's not a big empty house. Mom. It's a tiny bungalow and you know it. It has a second bedroom. She cried. Slapping her hand on the table. The sharp sound made me flinch. An empty bedroom. What's it for? Maya. Huh? For your imaginary friends? Or is it just too good for your mother? The one who gave you everything? Sharon. Please. Brianna interjected. Her voice dripping with fake concern. Don't upset yourself. Your blood pressure. She looked at me. Maya. Maybe we should all just take a breath. This is obviously a shock for you. Why don't you take some time to think it over? It was a clever tactic. Frame my firm boundary as a rash. Emotional decision. Suggest that with a little thought, I would surely come to my senses and do the right thing. But I wasn't shocked. I was prepared. And my answer wasn't going to change. There's nothing to think about, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I opened my wallet, pulled out a $10 bill, and placed it on the table. It was more than enough for my water. I am sorry you're in this position, Mom. I truly am. But my home is not the answer. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly on the floor. I could feel the eyes of the other patrons on me now. In their minds, I was the villain of this little play. The cold-hearted daughter turning her weeping mother away. My mother's face was a mask of betrayal. Brianna's was a mask of serene disappointment. I have to go, I said. And without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked out of the cafe. The bell on the door chimed mockingly as I left. The cool Portland air hit my face. But it did nothing to cool the fire in my gut. I had done it. I had held my ground. I had protected my sanctuary. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt sick. The drive home was a blur. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Every traffic light seemed to hold a new accusation. Selfish. Ungrateful. Cruel. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of lavender and old books wrapping around me. But the comfort it usually provided was gone. The quiet felt different now. It felt like isolation. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against it, closing my eyes. I had just declared war on my family. A family that, for all its flaws, was still my own. Had I made a terrible mistake? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A violent, jarring sound in the stillness. I pulled it out, my heart sinking. It was Leo. I knew what this was going to be. Round 2. I let it ring, hoping he'd give up and go to voicemail. He didn't. It rang and rang. A relentless, electronic summons. Finally, I took a deep breath and answered. I didn't even have time to say hello. What the hell is wrong with you? His voice was a roar, distorted by the phone speaker. There was no preamble. No greeting. Just pure, unfiltered rage. Leo. Calm down. I started. Don't you dare tell me to calm down. He shouted. I just got off the phone with Mom. She's hysterical. You made her cry in the middle of a coffee shop. How could you be so cruel? I wasn't cruel. I was honest. I can't let her move in with me. You can't or you won't. He shot back. You have a whole extra room. Maya. It's not like you're using it. What is your problem? Is this because of the wedding? Are you that jealous? You've always been jealous of me. The accusation hit me like a slap. Jealousy. It was his go-to explanation for any time I didn't fall in line with his vision of the world. It was easier for him to believe I was petty and jealous than to consider that I might have valid reasons for my choices. This has nothing to do with jealousy. Leo. This is about my life. And my home. Your home. Mom sold her home so that I could have a good start in my life with my wife. She sacrificed everything for me. For us. The very least you can do is give her a place to stay for a few months. It's called being a family. Maya. Something you've clearly forgotten. Family helps family. It's the one rule we're supposed to have. Family doesn't sell their entire financial security for a party without a plan. I snapped. My own anger finally breaking through. And family doesn't get to make unilateral decisions and then demand that I clean up the mess. Wow. He said. His voice dripping with contempt. So that's what this is about. Money. You're punishing her for helping me. Unbelievable. You know. For someone who pretends to be so independent. You're the most selfish person I know. Every word was designed to hurt. To find the cracks in my resolve and break them open. He was telling me I was a bad daughter. A bad sister. A bad person. And a small, terrified part of my brain was starting to believe him. I'm not having this conversation with you when you're yelling. Leo. Oh. We're having this conversation. He bellowed. You need to fix this. Maya. You call Mom. You apologize. And you tell her she can move in tomorrow. You hear me? Fix it. No. I said. The word tasting like ash in my mouth. I won't. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then. A click. He had hung up on me. I lowered the phone. My hand trembling. I slid down the kitchen cabinets until I was sitting on the cold linoleum floor. The silence rushed back in. Heavier than before. I had drawn a line in the sand. And now I was standing on one side. And my entire family was on the other. I wrapped my arms around my knees. Making myself as small as possible in my quiet, empty house. The sanctuary had become a prison cell. And I was the only inmate. My phone buzzed again. A text message. I flinched. Expecting another salvo from Leo or Brianna. But it was from a different name, my cousin. Jessica. We weren't incredibly close. But we understood each other. She had her own complicated history with the family's expectations. I opened the message with trepidation. It was short. Heard from my mom about the drama. Just wanted to say, don't let them guilt you. Your house. Your rules. You're not their backup plan. I read the words once. Then twice. A single tear escaped and rolled down my cheek. Hot against my cold skin. It wasn't a tear of sadness or guilt. It was a tear of profound, aching relief. It was the flicker of a single candle in a vast, encroaching darkness. Maybe I wasn't a monster. Maybe. Just maybe. I wasn't alone. Jessica's text was a lifeline. I clung to it for the rest of the day. Rereading the words until they were memorized. A mantra against the rising tide of guilt. You're not their backup plan. It was a simple phrase. But it held a universe of validation. For the first time. Someone in my family had acknowledged the dynamic I had lived with my entire life. I was the fallback. The responsible one. The one who was expected to absorb the consequences of everyone else's impulsive decisions. But one text message, however affirming, could not hold back the coordinated assault that followed. It was as if Leo, upon failing to break me with his frontal assault, had decided to lay siege to my emotional defenses. The campaign began subtly. It started with social media. Brianna was the general of this particular front. Her Instagram, usually a curated feed of brunch photos and sponsored yoga wear, suddenly took a somber turn. She posted a picture of Sharon, taken from a low angle to make her look more fragile, sitting on a park bench and staring wistfully into the distance. The caption was a masterclass in passive aggression. Feeling so much love and admiration for my incredible mother-in-law today. A woman who would literally give up her own home to see her children happy. She is the definition of selfless. Sending strength to all the mothers out there who give and give, even when it's not appreciated. Family first, selfless love, mother-in-law goals. The post was a work of art. It didn't mention me by name. But it didn't have to. The implication was as clear as a freshly cleaned window. The comments section quickly filled up with a chorus of support from her friends, Leo's friends, and a handful of distant relatives who only ever surfaced for weddings, funerals, and family drama. She's a saint. One comment read, "You guys are so lucky to have her. Hope she's doing okay," said another. One of my own aunts, Aunt Carol, even chimed in, "Your mother is a wonderful woman. Brianna. A true gem. Some people don't know how lucky they are." Each comment felt like a small paper cut. Insignificant on its own. But together, they left me feeling exposed and bleeding. I was being tried and convicted in a court of public opinion. And I wasn't even allowed to present a defense. To respond would be to stoop to their level. To air our family's dirty laundry for the world to see. Which was exactly what they wanted. So I did nothing. I muted Brianna's profile and tried to pretend it wasn't happening. But the digital assault was only the beginning. The next wave came via the telephone. It started with Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister. She was a woman who believed that the bonds of family were forged in a crucible of obligation and guilt. "Maya. Dear," she began, her voice syrupy sweet. "I was just talking to your mother. She sounds so lost. She's going through a lot." "Aunt Carol," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Well, yes. And it's up to her family to be there for her during this time. You know, when your grandfather passed, your mother dropped everything to come and take care of me. 4 months. She cooked. She cleaned. She held my hand. She didn't once complain about needing her space." The verbal quotation marks she put around the word space were practically audible. "This is a different situation," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "Is it, dear? Or is it that your generation has a different idea of what family means? You think it's something you can opt out of when it's inconvenient? Let me tell you something. Maya. A woman living all alone. With no family to rely on. That's a sad, lonely life. Don't push away the people who love you. You'll regret it one day when you're the one who needs help." It was emotional blackmail. Plain and simple. She was painting a future for me that was bleak and isolated. A punishment for my defiance. We talked for another 10 minutes. With her doing most of the talking. Her words a long, rambling sermon on the virtues of self-sacrifice and the sins of selfishness. By the time I hung up, I felt exhausted and raw. The calls kept coming. An uncle from out of state, who I hadn't spoken to in years, left a voicemail telling me to do the right thing by your mother. Another cousin sent a long, Rambling text message about how she had let her own mother-in-law move in and it was the most rewarding experience of her life. Each message, each call, was another stone added to the pile of guilt they were building on my chest. I started screening my calls. My phone permanently on silent. My safe, quiet home had begun to feel like a bunker. I was hiding from the outside world. From my own family. The peace I had fought so hard to create was being poisoned from the outside in. I stopped answering the door without first checking the peephole. I found myself jumping every time the phone rang. Even when it was a client. The most painful attack came from an unexpected place. Brianna. In what I can only describe as a move of breathtaking audacity. Showed up at my front door one afternoon. I saw her through the peephole. Holding a Tupperware container. My stomach twisted. I considered not answering. But I knew she would just stand there. A silent, smiling martyr on my doorstep. I opened the door a crack. Brianna. What are you doing here? She gave me that same bright, empty smile. Hi. Maya. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop this off. It's that lasagna you like. The one your mom makes. She was feeling a bit down. So we made a big batch to cheer her up. I know you're busy with work. So I thought you might like a home-cooked meal. She held out the container. It was still warm. The gesture was, on the surface, incredibly kind. But I knew what it really was. It was a Trojan horse. It was a way to remind me of my mother's love. To make me feel the guilt of rejecting it. It was a way to show me, and anyone who might be watching, that she was the caring, thoughtful one, while I was the cold, unfeeling recluse. That's nice of you, I said. My voice flat. I took the container. The plastic was warm against my cold hands. How are you holding up? She asked. Her voice oozing with faux concern. This whole situation must be so hard on you. I'm fine. Are you sure? She pressed. Peering past me as if trying to get a glimpse into my supposedly sad, empty house. You know. It's okay to change your mind. No one would think any less of you. In fact, they'd admire you for it. For being the bigger person. That was it. The breaking point. The sheer, unmitigated gall of this woman. Standing on my porch. Handing me a guilt lasagna. And telling me to be the bigger person. My voice came out low and steady. Colder than I knew I was capable of. The only thing I've changed my mind about, Brianna, is that this conversation is over. Thank you for the food. Goodbye. I closed the door in her smiling, shocked face. I didn't slam it. But the click of the lock was loud and final. I leaned against the door. My heart hammering. I looked down at the Tupperware in my hand. It felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I walked to the kitchen. Opened the trash can. And dropped the entire container inside. The sound it made was a dull, unsatisfying thud. I knew I should feel powerful. But I just felt empty. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The shadows of the trees outside dancing on the walls. The house was silent. But my mind was screaming. Voices came from everywhere. Leo's angry shouts. Aunt Carol's condescending advice. Brianna's sweet poison. My mother's wounded sobs. They were all there. In my head. A chorus of disapproval. Was I wrong? The question gnawed at me. Was I so obsessed with my independence? My space. That I had forgotten how to be a decent human being? They were all telling me the same thing. Was it possible that they were all right? And I was the one who was broken? I got out of bed and walked into the spare bedroom. It was mostly empty. Save for a few boxes I still hadn't unpacked and a yoga mat rolled up in the corner. In the moonlight filtering through the window. It did look empty. It looked lonely. I could easily fit a bed. A dresser. My mother's things. She could be here. Safe and sound. Under my roof. The family would be happy. The phone calls would stop. The war would be over. All I had to do was surrender. For a moment. I considered it. The thought of peace. Of an end to the conflict. Was so tempting. It felt like an easy solution. A simple way to make the pain stop. But then. I thought about the price of that peace. I would be giving up the one thing I had ever truly built for myself. My home would become a constant reminder of my defeat. Every time I heard her television through the wall. Every time I had to navigate around her in the small kitchen. Every time I felt the need to justify my own choices in my own house. I would be paying for that peace. It wouldn't be a sanctuary anymore. It would be a compromise. And my entire life had already been a compromise. I backed out of the room and closed the door softly. I went back to my bed. But I didn't lie down. I sat on the edge. Looking out the window at the dark. Quiet street. Jessica's words came back to me. You're not their backup plan. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about a room. It wasn't just about my house. It was about my right to exist as a person separate from my family's needs and expectations. It was about my right to be my own first priority. Not their last resort. The siege was taking its toll. I was isolated and exhausted. But I wasn't broken yet. And I wasn't going to surrender. Not now. Not ever. The siege continued. But my resolve had hardened. Their tactics of guilt and manipulation were no longer finding fertile ground. They were hitting a wall of quiet. Stubborn resistance. I stopped engaging. I let calls from unknown numbers go to voicemail. I archived text messages from relatives without reading them. I unfollowed everyone in my immediate family on social media. I was building a digital fortress around my embattled peace of mind. This, of course, only escalated their efforts. If they couldn't get to me directly, they would find other ways to apply pressure. A few days after the lasagna incident, I was on a video call with a major client, presenting a final design package for their new website. I was in the zone, feeling confident and professional. Suddenly, a notification popped up on my screen. A calendar reminder. It read, Dr. Miller, Mom's Heart Checkup. I froze for a split second. I had forgotten. My mom had a recurring appointment with her cardiologist. Just a routine checkup for a minor arrhythmia she'd had for years. It was usually nothing to worry about. But I was the one who always drove her. I was the one who took notes and asked the doctor questions. The client on the other end of the call was saying something. But his voice sounded distant. Like it was coming through a long tunnel. A wave of panic washed over me. Had they scheduled this on purpose? Was this another test? Maya? Is everything all right? The client asked. His face creased with concern on my screen. I forced a smile. My heart hammering against my ribs. Yes. Absolutely. Sorry. Just lost my train of thought. As I was saying, the mobile interface is fully optimized for. I managed to get through the rest of the meeting on autopilot. But my mind was racing. As soon as the call ended, I grabbed my phone. There were 3 missed calls from Leo and a text from Brianna. Your mom's doctor's appointment is in an hour. Leo is stuck in traffic on the bridge. Are you going to take her or not? The message was a trap. And I knew it. If I said no, I was the daughter who abandoned her mother with a heart condition. If I said yes, I was admitting defeat. Letting them pull me back into the role of the responsible caregiver. I stared at the phone, feeling cornered. Then, a cold, clear thought cut through the panic. This was exactly what they wanted. To create a crisis. To make me feel indispensable. To force my hand. But were they truly helpless? Leo had a car. Brianna presumably did too. They lived closer to my mother's temporary residence than I did. This wasn't a crisis. It was a manufactured emergency. My fingers flew across the screen as I typed my reply. Not to Brianna, but in a group chat with her and Leo. I have a hard deadline with a client I can't move. There are dozens of rideshare services like Uber and Lyft. Send her in one and I will cover the cost. Please text me an update from the doctor afterwards. It was a practical, reasonable solution. It showed concern for my mother's health without sacrificing my own professional obligations or personal boundaries. It was a checkmate. I was offering a solution. Just not the one they wanted. I put my phone on silent and turned it face down on my desk. I refused to watch for their response. For the next hour, I threw myself into my work with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. Channeling all my anxiety and anger into pixels and code. Later that afternoon, a text came through from an unknown number. It was my mother. Doctor said everything is fine. Leo got here just in time. Just wanted you to know. There was no thank you. No apology for the drama. But there was also no accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. They had managed on their own. The world had not ended. A small, crucial victory. I had proven to them, and more importantly to myself, that I was not the only person capable of solving a problem. This small victory, however, seemed to enrage Leo further. The failure of their pincer movement on my conscience meant he had to resort to more desperate measures. He decided it was time to confront me in person. He showed up on a Saturday morning. I was in my garden. My hands covered in dirt. Trying to coax some life into a struggling tomato plant. The roar of his oversized truck pulling up to the curb was unmistakable. It was a vehicle designed to announce its own arrival. I didn't even have to look up to know it was him. I stayed where I was. Kneeling in the dirt. My back to the street. I heard the truck door slam and the crunch of his boots on the gravel path leading to my house. He stopped a few feet behind me. Still hiding out in your garden? He asked. His voice laced with scorn. I finished patting the soil around the base of the plant before I slowly stood up. Wiping my hands on my jeans. I turned to face him. He looked tired and angry. Dark circles under his eyes. The righteous fury from our phone call had curdled into a sullen resentment. I'm not hiding. Leo. I'm living my life. Really? Because it looks like you're ignoring your family. Mom is miserable. She cries all the time. She barely eats. She's wasting away in our spare room. All because her own daughter won't let her in. Mom is a grown woman. Leo. She is responsible for her own happiness. And so are you. You're her son. Brianna is her daughter-in-law. Why is this my problem to solve? Because you're the one with the house. He exploded. His voice cracking. You're the one with the empty room. You have the solution right here. And you're just withholding it. For what? To prove a point? To punish us? No. I said. My voice quiet but firm. To protect myself. He stared at me. His jaw working. He didn't understand. To him, the concept of protecting yourself from your own family was alien. In his world, family was a resource. A safety net that was always there to catch him. He had never had to be his own. You know what your problem is, Maya? He said, taking a step closer. You think you're better than us. You've got your little house. Your little business. You look down on us because Mom helped me. Because she gave me something she never gave you. This is all just payback. Isn't it? The accusation hung in the air. Heavy and ugly. And for a terrifying second, I wondered if he was right. Was there a dark, vindictive part of me that was enjoying this? A bitter, 19-year-old version of myself that was relishing the fact that the golden child was finally facing a consequence? I looked at my brother, at his handsome, angry face. So used to getting what he wanted, and I searched my own heart. The answer I found wasn't simple. There was anger. Yes. There was resentment for years of being overlooked. But there wasn't a desire for revenge. What I felt, more than anything, was a deep, profound sadness. A sadness for the relationship we could have had. If only we had been treated as equals. This isn't about payback, Leo, I said. My voice softer now. It's about balance. For our whole lives. The scales have been tilted. Mom has poured everything into you, her time, her energy, her money. And now, she's sold her house for you. That's a massive, life-altering decision. And the consequences of that decision belong to the people who made it. To you. And to her. I can't carry that weight for you. It's not mine to carry. He just shook his head. A look of utter incomprehension on his face. I don't even know who you are anymore. Maybe you never really did. I whispered. He stood there for another moment. As if waiting for me to take it all back. To laugh and say it was all a big misunderstanding. When I didn't. He turned without another word. Stomped back to his truck. And drove away. His tires spitting gravel onto my lawn. I watched him go. A hollow feeling in my chest. This was the midpoint. The moment of no return. I had just articulated the core of my resistance. Not just to him. But to myself. This wasn't a fight about a room anymore. It was a fundamental realignment of our entire family structure. I had spent my life as the quiet, Reliable support beam. Holding everything up without complaint. But I had just told the architect of the family that I was resigning from my post. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the whole structure was now in danger of collapsing. And I had no idea what would be left standing in the rubble. The confrontation with Leo was a turning point. It was as if I had finally spoken the truth of our family aloud. And the sound waves from that truth were now rearranging everything. The frantic phone calls and texts from relatives slowed to a trickle. Then stopped completely. Brianna's passive-aggressive social media posts ceased. It wasn't a truce. It was a cold war. I had been officially excommunicated. Cast out of the family circle for my heresy. The silence was a relief. But it was also profoundly lonely. I tried to fill the quiet with work and routine. I took on new projects. I spent hours in my garden, pulling weeds with a vengeance. I went for long runs in the damp Oregon twilight, trying to outpace the gnawing feeling in my gut. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the problem of my mother remained. An unresolved chord humming beneath the surface of my life. Realizing that their campaign of emotional warfare had failed, they changed tactics. If I wouldn't provide the solution they wanted, they would simply ignore the problem altogether. My offer to help find an apartment or to subsidize rent was met with a wall of silence. They were content to let my mother languish in Leo and Brianna's spare room. A living testament to my supposed cruelty. It was a waiting game. They were waiting for me to break. Guilt is a persistent ghost. It haunted me in the quiet moments. When I cooked a meal for myself in my peaceful kitchen, I would think of her. Probably eating a microwave dinner on a cardboard box. When I curled up with a book in my cozy living room, I would picture her trying to sleep on a lumpy futon. I was winning the war for my boundaries. But the cost was my own peace of mind. I knew I couldn't live like this forever. I couldn't let her become a permanent, miserable fixture in their apartment. A situation that would fester and poison what was left of our family. They had refused to accept my help. So I decided to take a different approach. I had to create a solution so practical, so reasonable, that for them to refuse it would expose their true motives, not to find a home for Mom, but to force their way into mine. I spent a week doing intensive research. I wasn't just looking for a cheap room for rent. I was looking for a community. I scoured listings for senior living apartments, co-housing communities, and accessory dwelling units in quiet, safe neighborhoods. I made spreadsheets comparing costs, amenities, and locations. I was treating my mother's housing crisis like a freelance project. Channeling my anxiety into organized, actionable steps. Finally, I found it. It was a small, one-bedroom apartment in a well-maintained complex for residents 55 and over. It was in a quiet part of Hillsborough, not too far from a bus line and a grocery store. It had a small community garden, a library, and social events. It wasn't luxurious, but it was safe, clean, and respectable. It was a place she could have her own life, her own space, her own independence. The rent was reasonable, but it would still be a stretch for her on her limited Social Security income. I ran the numbers over and over again. I looked at my own budget, at the emergency fund I had so painstakingly built. Taking on another monthly expense would be a significant sacrifice. It would mean pushing back my own financial goals. It would mean In a very real way. Subsidizing the cost of Leo's wedding for the foreseeable future. The irony was bitter. But as I stared at the pictures of the neat little apartment, I realized it was a price I was willing to pay. Not for them. For me. For an end to the stalemate. For a chance to sleep through the night without the ghost of guilt sitting on my chest. I called the leasing office and made an appointment to view the apartment. I didn't tell my family. This was my project. My last-ditch effort to build a bridge over the chasm that had opened between us. The apartment was even better in person. It was small. But bright. With a large window overlooking a grove of birch trees. It smelled faintly of fresh paint. I could picture my mother here. I could see her arranging her photos on the mantelpiece. Setting up her favorite armchair by the window. I could see her making a life for herself. I took a deep breath and spoke to the building manager. I explained the situation vaguely, that I was helping my mother downsize. I filled out the application in her name and paid the application fee and the security deposit from my own account. It was a huge risk. She could refuse. She could throw it all back in my face. But it was a risk I had to take. That evening, I composed an email. I sent it to my mom. And I CC'd Leo and Brianna. So there could be no miscommunication. No twisting of my words. Subject: an idea for your new place. Hi Mom. I know things have been difficult lately. And I've been doing a lot of thinking. I want you to be happy and settled in a place of your own. I know that my house isn't the right fit. But I've been looking at other options for you. I found a lovely one-bedroom apartment in a senior community in Hillsborough. It's safe, quiet, and has a lot of great amenities. I've attached the link to their website and some photos I took today. I have already filled out the application and paid the deposit to hold the place for you. I know that rent will be a concern. So I want to make this offer. I will commit to paying half of your rent every month for the first 2 years. To give you time to get fully settled and comfortable. This is not a loan. It's a gift. Please. Take a look and let me know what you think. The apartment is available to move in as soon as next week. Love. Maya. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. My heart was pounding. I had laid all my cards on the table. This wasn't just an offer of money. It was an offer of peace. It was a detailed, generous, and loving solution that respected both her need for a home and my need for boundaries. It was, in my mind, the perfect compromise. For 2 days, there was nothing. The silence from their end was absolute. I checked my email every 5 minutes. My anxiety grew with each passing hour. Had they even read it? Were they just ignoring me? Was this all for nothing? The response, when it finally came, was not an email. It was a knock on my door. It was late. Almost 10 o'clock at night. A storm was rolling in. The first real storm of the fall. The wind was picking up. Rattling the windows. I looked through the peephole and my blood ran cold. It was all 3 of them. My mother. Leo. And Brianna. They weren't just standing there. They had luggage. 2 large suitcases and several smaller bags were piled on my small porch. Leo's face was set in a grim, determined line. Brianna looked nervous, but resolute. And my mother. My mother was crying. Not the theatrical, wounded tears from the coffee shop. These were the quiet, desperate tears of someone who had reached the end of her rope. This was it. The final, desperate move in their psychological chess game. They had rejected my carefully constructed peace treaty. They had ignored my generous offer. They had taken my solution, crumpled it up, and thrown it away. And now they were here, on a stormy night, with all their baggage, literal and metaphorical. They were done asking. They were done manipulating. This was an invasion. They were calling my bluff. Believing that faced with this final, dramatic confrontation, I would have no choice but to fold. I rested my forehead against the cool wood of the door. The sound of the wind and their presence outside a roaring in my ears. The moment I had been running from. The moment I had tried so hard to prevent. Had finally arrived. The storm wasn't just rolling in. It was already here. And it was waiting on my doorstep. The sound of the wind was a mournful howl. A fitting soundtrack for the scene on my porch. For a long moment, I just stood there. My hand frozen on the doorknob. My forehead pressed against the door. I was separated from them by only 2 inches of solid wood. But it felt like miles of scorched earth. Every instinct screamed at me to keep the door shut. To pretend I wasn't home. To wait until they gave up and went away. But I knew they wouldn't. This was their last stand. I took a deep, shaky breath. Straightened up. And unlocked the deadbolt. The click was unnaturally loud in the tense silence. I pulled the door open. The wind immediately whipped a spray of cold rain into my face. They stood there, huddled together under the weak glow of the porch light, looking like refugees from a battle I had started. My mother's face was pale and streaked with rain and tears. Leo stood beside her, a hand on her shoulder. His expression a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. Brianna hovered behind them. Her usual polished appearance replaced by a look of genuine anxiety. The suitcases at their feet looked heavy and final. Maya, Leo said. His voice flat, devoid of its usual angry energy. We need to come in. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He truly believed that this final, desperate act would be the one that broke me. He thought that the sight of our weeping mother on a stormy night would override every boundary I had so carefully built. But seeing them there, seeing the raw desperation of their maneuver, something inside me shifted. The fear and guilt that had been my constant companions for weeks began to recede. Replaced by a strange, cold clarity. They weren't seeing me. They were seeing a solution. A door to a warm, dry place where their problems would be solved. They weren't my family in that moment. They were a problem trying to force its way into my life. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the sound of the wind. You're not coming in. Leo's jaw tightened. Don't start this again. Maya. Look at her. Just look at her. Are you really going to leave your mother out in a storm? The storm isn't the problem. Leo, I said, my gaze unwavering. The problem is that you are standing on my doorstep with luggage. The problem is that I gave you a perfect, viable, generous solution 2 days ago. And you didn't even have the decency to respond. Brianna finally spoke. Her voice small and shaky. We talked about the apartment. Maya. It's too far away. And your mom doesn't want to live all by herself in a place like that. A place like what? I shot back. A safe, clean, independent living community. You mean a place that isn't my house? It's not about that. My mother whispered, her voice thick with tears. I don't want to be a burden. I want to be with my family. Then you should be with the family who made you sell your house. I said. The words sharper than I intended. The truth was a cruel blade. I saw her flinch as if I had physically struck her. The guilt surged back. Hot and sharp. But I pushed it down. I had to see this through. I looked at all three of them. My family. My antagonists. This isn't a negotiation anymore. I said. My voice hardening. You didn't come here to talk. You came here to force my hand. You brought suitcases because you planned on staying. Whether I agreed or not. You used the rain and the dark and Mom's tears as weapons. Leo took a step forward. His fists clenched. She is our mother. Yes. She is. I met his anger with my own. A fire that had been smoldering for weeks. She's your mother. Too. Leo. So why is her well-being my sole responsibility? You got an $80,000 wedding. Brianna got her dream honeymoon. And what did Mom get? A futon in your spare room and a future of uncertainty. You are a married man now. You want to be treated like an adult? Then act like one. The consequences of your choices are your responsibility to manage. Not mine. Silence. My words hung in the damp air. Stark and undeniable. Leo stared at me. His anger faltering. Replaced by a look of stunned confusion. It was as if no one had ever held him accountable for anything in his entire life. Brianna looked down at her feet. Unable to meet my eyes. My gaze softened as I looked at my mom. She was shivering. Hugging herself against the cold. The fight went out of me. Replaced by a deep, weary sadness. Mom. I said. My voice gentle now. I love you. I will not let you be homeless. But I will not let you move into my house. My home is not your backup plan. It can't be. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My fingers moving quickly across the screen. I had anticipated this. Not the specifics. But the desperation. I had my own backup plan. I had booked a hotel room earlier that evening. Right after I sent the email. On the off chance they did something exactly like this. I've booked a room for you at a hotel just down the road. I said. Turning the screen to show them the confirmation. It's an extended stay place. It has a little kitchenette. It's clean and it's warm. I have paid for 1 full week. I looked directly at Leo. You will drive her there now. You will help her get settled. And for the next 7 days. The three of you are going to sit down and figure out a real, long-term plan. You can accept the apartment I found. Or you can find a different one. You can figure out your finances. Together. But the days of me being the default solution are over. I held out my phone to Leo. He stared at it. Then at me. The fight was gone from his eyes. Replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. He had lost. His final, most dramatic gambit had failed. My quiet, Accommodating sister had a spine of steel he had never known existed. He took the phone without a word. My mother looked at me. Her face a canvas of conflicting emotions. There was hurt. Yes. But there was also a flicker of something else in her eyes. It looked like surprise. Maybe even a sliver of respect. She was seeing me. Really seeing me. For the first time. Not as her compliant daughter. Not as a resource. But as a separate, adult woman with a will of her own. Get your things. Leo. She said softly. Her voice barely a whisper against the wind. Let's go. Leo nodded numbly. He and Brianna began to pick up the suitcases. They didn't look at me. The air was thick with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. As they were about to leave, I spoke one last time. The offer for the apartment still stands. I said quietly. And so does my offer to help with the rent. The choice is yours. My mom paused on the steps and looked back at me. Her face was unreadable in the dim light. She just nodded once. A small, almost imperceptible gesture. And then turned and followed her son into the stormy night. I watched until the red taillights of Leo's truck disappeared down the street. Then I stepped back inside and closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my back against the door. The wood cool against my skin. The house was silent again. The wind howled outside. But inside, the storm had finally passed. I slid down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. A single sob escaped my lips. A ragged, tearing sound. It wasn't a sob of sadness or victory. It was a sob of pure, unadulterated emotional exhaustion. The war was over. I had held the line. I had protected my sanctuary. But the cost had been immense. I had redrawn the map of my family. And I was now on an island of my own creation. I didn't know if anyone would ever be willing to build a bridge to reach me again. The week that followed was the quietest of my life. There were no angry phone calls. No manipulative text messages. No unexpected visitors. The silence was absolute. It was what I had wanted. What I had fought for. But it felt heavy. Laden with unspoken grief. I had won the battle. But I wasn't sure what victory was supposed to feel like. It mostly felt like emptiness. I worked. I gardened. I went through the motions of my peaceful, independent life. But a part of my mind was always listening. Waiting for the phone to ring. For an email to arrive. I had given them a week. I didn't know what would happen when that week was up. Would they show up at my door again? Would the Cold War simply resume? On the 6th day, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was my mother. The subject line was simply, apartment. My hand trembled as I clicked it open. The email was short and to the point. Maya. I visited the apartment in Hillsborough yesterday with Jessica. It's a nice place. The application I signed at your house is still valid. The manager said. I would like to take it. We need to talk about the logistics. Let me know when you are free. Mom. I read the email 3 times. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of the pain and chaos of the past few weeks. But there was also no blame. No guilt. It was a practical, straightforward message. And buried within its sparse words was a quiet concession. She had accepted my terms. She had visited the apartment not with Leo or Brianna, but with my cousin Jessica, the one person who had supported me. It was a subtle but significant signal. I wrote back immediately, suggesting we meet for coffee the next day. She agreed. We met at a neutral location. A quiet, non-trendy cafe halfway between my house and her hotel. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner, stirring a cup of tea. She looked older than she had a month ago. The stress had carved new lines around her eyes and mouth. I sat down, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. The chasm between us was still there, wide and deep. "Hi, Mom," I said softly. "Hi, Maya." Her voice was subdued. We ordered our drinks and then sat in an awkward silence until the server brought them over. I didn't know where to begin. Apologize for my harsh words. Defend my actions. Rehash the entire ugly affair. She spoke first. "Jessica likes the apartment," she said, staring down into her teacup. "She thinks the community garden is a nice touch. Says I could grow tomatoes. I thought you might like that," I said. Another silence. Then she looked up, and her eyes met mine. They were clear. For the first time in a long time. Of the manipulative haze I had grown so used to. "What you said that night," she began, her voice faltering. "About the consequences belonging to the people who made the decisions. You were right." I was so stunned I couldn't speak. It was the closest to an admission of fault I had ever heard from her. I got carried away. She continued, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "I wanted Leo to have everything. That perfect wedding. It was like a fairy tale. I wanted to be the one to give it to him. I didn't think about what would happen the day after. I just assumed. I assumed you'd be there to catch me. I've always been there to catch you, Mom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. That was the problem. I couldn't be the safety net anymore. It's not fair to me. And it's not fair to Leo either. He's never going to learn how to stand on his own if you and I are always there to break his fall. She nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "He's angry," she said. "And Brianna. She's not happy. They feel like you've abandoned us." "I haven't abandoned you," I said, leaning forward. "I'm sitting right here. I'm going to help you pay your rent. I'm going to help you move your things. What I've abandoned is the idea that I have to set myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. The roles we've all been playing. They don't work anymore." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. But this one was different. It wasn't for show. It was real. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Being on my own." "You won't be on your own," I promised. "You'll just be in your own place. And so will I. We can. We can learn how to be a family in a new way. A better way." It was a start. It wasn't a magical resolution. The hurt and resentment wouldn't disappear overnight. My relationship with Leo and Brianna was in ruins. And it might never be repaired. But with my mother, for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. A possibility of a relationship built not on obligation and guilt, but on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. Over the next few weeks, We put the plan into action. I co-signed the lease for her. I helped her move the few belongings she had in storage into her new apartment. Leo and Brianna were conspicuously absent. It was just me, my mom, and Jessica, carrying boxes and assembling furniture. On the last day, after we had hung her pictures and made her bed, we stood in the middle of her new living room. It was small, but it was hers. Sunlight streamed through the large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "It's nice," she said, her voice quiet. "It is," I agreed. She turned to me, her expression hesitant. "Thank you, Maya. For everything." "You're welcome, Mom." I moved to leave, to give her space in her new home. But she reached out and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I'm sorry," she said. The words were soft, but they landed with the force of a thunderclap. "For not seeing you. For just assuming. I'm sorry." Tears welled in my eyes. It was all I had ever wanted to hear. "I know," I whispered. "Me too." We stood there for a moment, holding hands in a patch of sunlight. The war was over. The treaties had been signed. And the long, slow work of rebuilding could finally begin. Months later, on a crisp, sunny Saturday in late spring, I was in my garden, kneeling in the dirt, tending to my own tomato plants. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a picture message from my mom. It was a photo of a single, small, perfectly red tomato, held in the palm of her hand. The caption read, "Look. The first one." I smiled. A real, unburdened smile. I typed back a simple reply, "It's beautiful. Save some for me." I put my phone away and went back to my work. My hands in the rich, dark earth. The house behind me was quiet. But it was no longer an empty quiet. It was a peaceful quiet. It was the sound of a sanctuary that had been fought for and won. It was the sound of home. And for the first time, I felt truly, completely, at peace within its walls. The relationship with my family was still a work in progress. A garden that needed careful tending. But for now, in the warm sun, with the promise of a future harvest, it was enough.